In the previous class, Bethany had introduced the ideas of carrying capacity and limiting factors. She then had students enact a simulation of how a population of deer would fluctuate as available resources like water, food, and space changed over time.
Here's the world population.
This video shows the following day when Bethany asks students to take what they know about these two concepts and apply them to projections for the human population over time. What is important in this lesson is that Bethany presses students to explain what they mean by carrying capacity and limiting factors, and to apply the idea to human populations. The students can define these two concepts, but that does not at all indicate understanding.
Here's the world population of people.
Damn.
Okay? So use what you know about limiting factors and carrying capacity and your knowledge about humans to make some predictions about what will happen to the world's population.
Like, this is going like up right now, but I think eventually at some point it has to decrease.
Okay, so do you think it's going to go down lower where we are now, or do you think
Your idea.
get up to a certain
Yeah, let's write down. Tell me
Probably
what
get up to a certain point.
So what do you think is going to happen after it starts to go down?
Stop, please.
I think
How much further will
it'll
it
start
go?
climbing back in.
How much
What do you think is going to cause it? Because you said it's going to go up, 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 but then it's going to fall. Why? What's going to make it fall?
What's the reason? What's the reason that it's climbing?
Well, sure. What's the reason why it's climbing, and then why doesn't it keep going up, 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 up forever?
So it says right now it's like
I'm not really
7,000.
That's a good question, though. Why is it going up?
Yeah. Why does it keep going up? And then why? But you said it's going to like fall down.
Around 2,000.
So what's going to make it fall?
Yeah, but I was saying, I saw a graph in
Probably just like the population getting weaker, you know?
Why, if the population is too big, will that make it go down?
Well, because probably that's too much capacity for the world, you know?
Oh, so the world has a certain carrying capacity? All right. Write that down.
Well, we thought ours is kind of the same idea. We thought that it'd be increasing like the same way for a long while until finally the limiting factor, like resources or space, would have to start becoming limited because there's so many people to take care of. And then like it'd still be going up, but they have to it'd
start leveling out and then decreasing.
Okay, good deal.
What's the rest of the ideal?
Alright. Okay, so you think we have a while till we reach capacity?
Yeah, because like people just kind of
Keep reproducing, but so how do we know, like, what do you mean by reaching its capacity? What would be the, like, so when would it stop going up?
I don't know, like a few years probably.
Okay, and then what would happen?
And then I think it would like level up and then or decreasing. Oh no, actually I don't think it would ever decrease.
It'll never decrease, it would
Lost
just
my
reach
train of
a...
thought. Where was I at?
It would either go like level out or it would go up.
Okay,
Or
because...
it's gonna break with, like, you know, when it's level.
Yeah, that's what you guys both think of that it's going to level and then go back to going up.
Well, I just don't think it's ever gonna decrease.
We're going to look at these ideas that people share on the board and we're going to see what they thought. So the first idea is this orange line right here. This is, I believe it's Serena. Can you explain your orange line here?
My line was that I said that the population was increasing
Because?
because there's a lot more people that they'll probably mate, and so it's gonna keep rising.
Okay, and so go ahead.
I think it's gonna slow down on growing because one, like people don't want kids as much as before. Like most people don't want kids, and a lot of people are smoking cigarettes and all that, so it's gonna kill them faster.
Okay, so you think the rate of how fast the population can increase is going to slow down?
Yeah.
And you think that there's this thing about people, how many kids they want?
Yeah. Like people are starting to have less kids.
So that could be maybe considered a limiting factor to the population. Alan and I were talking about that too a little bit. He was thinking about a population of China and thinking about if that's still increasing at the same rate. And what were you thinking about?
Because like in China they're too overpopulated, and I'm pretty sure they have a law where you can only have one child.
Okay, so what would that do to the population?
Like, well, before it was like increasing. Now they're just trying to decrease it.
Okay, so what would that graph look like?
Increasing, and eventually it's gonna start.
Okay. And then this person, Anthony, you want to talk about your idea?
So I just said it'll go up a little more because we're still reproducing, but once you get to our carrying capacity, that's when like people start to get more crowded, so then we'll go down a little bit and then go back up. Because then we will eventually run out of resources for everyone. And then when we go down, we'll get more resources, and then we'll go back up and down and keep going like that.
And I heard a lot of you talking about space as what you think is like the ultimate limiting factor for humans, is how much space they have. I didn't hear a lot of you talking about food as a limiting factor for humans. So what do you think about that? What do you think is the most important limiting factor? Yes.
I think we have an overabundance of food, so enough for everyone.
Okay. Does everybody agree with Wallace?
No.
Say that a little bit louder.
But if you can.
She said, yeah, but it's a matter of whether you can get the food or not. Oh, can you share this one?
Do I have to read it out loud?
Yeah.
Okay. The population will continue to increase until a certain point where things like resources, food, etc. will become limited, so then the population will begin to level off and then decrease in order for there to be enough resources for everyone.
Okay, so does that match with your idea, Anthony? Yeah, so I think that kind of goes, that's like the explanation for what Anthony drew here. It was kind of like oscillating, like up and down here, above or around the carrying capacity. Okay, so I want to show you a graph because I looked this up yesterday, and I looked up what the UN predicted, and this is the graph that I found. And they said, well, we don't really know what's going to happen to the human population. This is 2000 right here. Here is 2100. So it's saying over the next period of time here, maybe this is what's going to happen, just like some of you predicted. Maybe this is what's going to happen, like you predicted. And maybe this is going to happen, like some of you predicted. So,
I just want to say that I think the green is incorrect.
The green one's incorrect because?
Because that can't happen.
Why?
Unless we have to, like, a whole bunch of earthquakes and tornadoes and all that.
Because?
The rapture. Because that's a lot of people to, like, just all of a sudden die.
Yeah, so you think that, you don't think that this one's a very good graph because you think it's not unlikely that this is the carrying capacity?
But, like, there has to be a lot of tornadoes and, like, volcanic exploding.
Because, and what would those do to, like, why would those make this happen?
Because it would kill us.
Hmm?
Because it would kill us.
It would kill us? So you're thinking about actually the killing of the people, like how many people are dying versus how many are being born?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I add on to that?
Yeah.
Like you were saying, environmental disasters, not only could it kill the people, it could, like, destroy the land. Like, all the crops that they're making dies, then they have to, like, make money, but that's where they made their money, so yeah, then they can't afford food and they don't have food to rely on, so they start dying out.
Yeah. On Wednesday, some of you were talking about this and how it related to other animals, and you were thinking about if there was such a thing as a population that didn't have a predator, and what could happen to that. And so the group was talking about this brown tree snake on the island of Guam, and we actually have somebody in our class who has first-hand experience with this snake. And it's Richard, so if we could, Richard's going to tell us a little bit about the snake.
It's a foreign kind of animal, so it's not indigenous to Guam.
Okay, so it's not indigenous to Guam, and then, but it arrived in Guam somehow from another place. They think on a ship, maybe after World War II, it appeared in Guam. And so then, what happened?
Oh, it ate all the native birds of Guam. So
Okay.
there's like no birds flying around now.
Okay, and then, so if we could imagine the population of this tree snake, it started off here. What happened to it? It increased? Because, why could it increase?
Because the food source.
It had.
Wait, what's it?
Have proper habitat.
Okay.
Oh.
So.
I think it's increasing because there's no predators for it.
Okay.
And nothing will kill them off except for humans.
Okay. So it can increase because nothing's killing it off, and it has a good food source. Alan, I need to be able to have you listening because you also heard this, so you can help contribute here. So we're saying the tree snake can increase, and Wallace said because it has good food source, Richard told us it could eat the birds. Do you know how it gets the birds?
Like, the birds, they nest up on like the electric poles, and they can climb up the pole. They eat the birds, but then they also cause like power outages because they fall on the wires and electrocutes them.
Yeah, and it causes major power outages on the whole island.
That's some stupid snake. This.
Well, I mean, are they stupid or are they smart because they're getting their food that they need?
They died for a meal.
All right. What do we imagine that this graph of the tree snakes will look like over time? So we said they increased because they didn't have a natural predator on this island and they had some good food source. Louder, please.
It'll go down because there won't be as much birds for them to eat, and humans are starting to kill them.
All right, so there's not as much food, and then what happened?
They're starting to die because the humans are.
Okay, and then what should the graph do now?
Go down.
How far?
Down.
Like this?
They also reproduce like really fast.
What?
So they also reproduce like really fast.
So if they're reproducing, what would we expect? I drew this line and you all said, no, that's not what happened. So what should the graph look like?
Go back up again. And go down again.
Okay, so Cecilia thinks it's going to look like this. We're going to come up with some solutions because this is called a invasive species. It ended up on this island and it caused some problems, right? They don't see their native birds at all anymore. Also, some of other mammals it eats too, so there's just, it really decreased the diversity on this island. And so one solution is to kill them when you see them. And then you just suggested another solution. And we're going to actually, after maybe in a couple weeks, we're going to think about solutions for indigenous species or invasive species and how we could solve that problem.
I was going to say the invasive species.
Yeah.
We had some from Japan on the barge that floated over here from the tsunami.
Oh yeah? Like what?
There were multiple different types of animals.
And Wallace, what did they do? Like, are you talking about that big raft that was in the ocean?
Yeah.
What did they do to it?
I think they seized it and then started looking around on it to see what kind of invasive species there were. Because if there were too many, then that would kill off all the fish, supposedly.
So if you could flip in your journal to the page where you have your summary chart from our last activity.
Oh yeah, that was homework.
Okay, so you might have had any number of names for this activity that you could remember what it was. And then we said this column is what happened. So what happened? Can somebody remind us what they put in that column?
I drew a graph.
Okay, so I heard a lot of you drew a graph. What did the graph show?
It went up, and then it went down, and it went up, and it went down. And it kind of did like a short up and down, and then went up.
All right, and so if you just draw that on your paper, you might not remember what it was. So you should probably label the axis of this graph. So what was this representing? Deer? Yeah. Or year?
Year.
Year. And this was?
Year.
Number of years.
Year number. Okay. All right. And we might also say in words what happened. So could somebody describe for us what this graph actually shows, besides just that it goes up and down, up and down? What does that even mean? Okay, so there was an increase and decrease in the population over the years. So let's make sure you have something in that column. What should go in this column? So before we write it down, I want us to maybe think of a checklist of why this happened. So we're trying to explain why the graph went up and down, and also maybe why it didn't go like way up or way down. So let's think about the explanation of that. and maybe just tell us one part of the explanation. Abbas?
I said the more resources equals more deer.
Okay, so you're talking about the amount of resources. You said if there were what? If there's more resources?
Then there's more deer.
Okay, and then what?
If there's less resources, there's less deer.
Okay, why?
Why?
So let's add on to that. So we would talk about the amount of resources related to the deer, and then let's say why that matters.
Oh, because if the deer don't have resources, then they would die. But then if they do have resources, they'll eat and reproduce.
Okay, so ability to survive and reproduce, yes. And let's add some vocabulary to that so we can kind of add this academic language to our explanation. So what's our vocabulary that we would include that explains this concept?
Carrying capacity.
Okay, so something about carrying, so you would explain what carrying capacity is and how it relates to this. And?
Limiting resources.
Okay, so what I'd like you to do right now is in your journal, write down an explanation why, the why part to this. Why did our graph look like this? Try to include these ideas in your explanation. So don't just write down on your paper carrying capacity. Okay, I want you to explain what carrying capacity is in this activity, in this simulation. Don't just write down limiting factors, say what the limiting factor was and how it relates. So imagine this like as a checklist to help you write out what you would write here in your Y column. How did you know what the carrying capacity was here?
Because it just like it always went basically went up and down around 10.
So you could say there was a carrying capacity that represents, or like what is the carrying capacity?
10.
But why?
Oh no.
You do know. You picked a number, so you explain why you picked that number.
Because it averaged around 10. Like it kept going across 10 and then went down across 10 and then stopped at 10 a couple times.
So that shows that around 10, what's true for those deer? Because they can. Okay, yes, that's what you can write down. Okay, so I've asked Michelle to share what she wrote. What? Can you share what you wrote in that column, please?
When there were less deers, the more resources there were, which provides more stuff for them to survive. And that was the limitation factor.
What was the limiting factor? Limiting factor.
Resources.
So she said resources was a limiting factor. And did you mention this yet? Okay, so she got this part, and this part. To do this, I want you to write down your ideas about, did this activity support, contradict, or is it kind of just neutral to what your group's hypothesis was? So think about your group's hypothesis and write down, how does this activity help you support your hypothesis? Or does it actually contradict your hypothesis? Or is it neutral, like does it not really support it, but it doesn't contradict it? All right, what did you say, Luciana?
So it was neutral because there are some disasters and stuff.
Oh my God. All right, but could yours relate to this idea of limiting factors? Because like when there's a forest fire, what would that do? Because, okay, so I might change yours not to neutral, because it sounds like it does support yours. Okay, yeah.
It's hard, isn't it? What's different to me about this class is that Ms. Schoberg doesn't just let you say words.
Explain it.
Yep, because like in another science class, you could just be like carrying capacity, and the teacher would say, "Oh, that's great, you used the word. Great job, write it down." And Ms. Schoberg is like, "Nope."
You gotta explain your reasoning with her.
I know, it's hard.
You have to explain it like you say the explanation and you have to explain that.
Okay, 3, 2, 1.